In the neon glow of late 1980s Hollywood, a young actor named Keanu Reeves began his climb towards stardom. He was unlike the typical leading men of his era. He wasn't loud, boastful, or desperate for the spotlight. Instead, Keanu carried himself with a quiet dignity, a softness in his voice, and an intensity in his gaze that suggested a man more interested in the art of storytelling than the shallow glamour of fame. Hollywood quickly noticed. After humble beginnings in smaller films, Keanu broke through with Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure in 1989. Audiences loved his goofy charm, his wide-eyed wonder, and his unpolished authenticity. It was clear, even then, that this was not an actor trying to become someone else. He was simply Keanu, and that was enough. Soon, the studios wanted more, and they would get it. The 1990s became Keanu's era of ascent. He proved his range by leaping from comedy to action, carving out a place among the industry's brightest stars. In 1994, he stunned the world in Speed, playing Jack Traven, the daring cop who must stop a runaway bus. The film was a box office juggernaut, grossing over $350 million worldwide. Suddenly, Keanu wasn't just a charming newcomer, he was a bankable leading man, someone who could carry a blockbuster on his shoulders. Hollywood reporters began calling him the next big action star. Studios lined up to attach his name to projects, and his fame skyrocketed. But even with success flooding his life, Keanu remained grounded. He shunned the Hollywood party scene, rode the subway like any other commuter, and donated quietly to hospitals and charities. He was climbing higher, yet refusing to become what the industry expected him to be. That contradiction made him fascinating and beloved. Then came 1999, the year that redefined Keanu Reeves forever. The Matrix wasn't just a film, it was a cultural earthquake. As Neo, the reluctant hacker turned savior of humanity, Keanu delivered one of the most iconic performances in cinematic history. The bullet dodging, the wire-fu combat, the philosophical depth, Keanu embodied it all with a quiet strength that captivated audiences around the globe. Overnight, he became a symbol of rebellion, of hope, of possibility. The Matrix grossed over $460 million, won 4 Academy Awards, and cemented itself as one of the greatest films ever made. For Keanu, it was the crowning jewel of his career. He had reached the peak, not just an actor anymore, but a legend in the making. To the public, it seemed like nothing could bring him down. But Hollywood is cruel, and for every rise, there is always a fall waiting just around the corner. Despite his soaring success, Keanu carried a shadow within him, a shadow shaped by personal tragedy. During the same years the world was celebrating him, Keanu lost his daughter in a stillbirth, and soon after, his longtime partner, Jennifer Syme, died in a car accident. His life, once painted in bright Hollywood colors, was now stained with grief. Yet Keanu never let the world see him collapse. Instead, he endured silently, throwing himself into work, showing up on set with discipline and humility. But in Hollywood, grief can make you vulnerable. As the 2000s began, the industry shifted. New stars emerged, tastes changed, and critics, always hungry for blood, began targeting him. They called him wooden, flat, lifeless. The same quiet intensity that once made him iconic was now mocked. And then, it happened. The project that would be branded as Keanu Reeves' biggest flop, the film that critics would use as a weapon to try and bury his career forever. Hollywood had built Keanu up as a golden boy, but now the stage was set for betrayal. His journey from underdog to superstar had been remarkable, but what lay ahead would test him in ways no action sequence, no stunt, no bullet dodge could ever prepare him for. The rise was glorious, but the fall would be brutal. And yet, hidden within that fall was the seed of something greater, a revenge story unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. The fall came not with silence, but with thunder. After the dizzying heights of The Matrix, the world expected Keanu Reeves to remain invincible, to dominate every box office, to continue shaping the future of cinema. But Hollywood is a machine that thrives on building icons only to tear them down. In the early 2000s, Keanu began to choose projects that didn't land the way audiences or critics hoped. There was Johnny Mnemonic, a cyberpunk thriller that critics dismissed as messy and incoherent. Then came The Day the Earth Stood Still, which failed to impress despite its ambitious premise. But the true storm was yet to come. In 2013, Universal Pictures released 47 Ronin, an ambitious fantasy samurai epic starring Keanu in the lead role. It was meant to be a grand return, a sweeping tale that would blend Japanese legend with Hollywood spectacle. Instead, it became a disaster of historic proportions. With a budget of nearly $175 million, 47 Ronin was one of the most expensive productions in Universal's history. The studio envisioned it as a holiday blockbuster, banking on Keanu's star power to pull in massive audiences worldwide. But when the film finally premiered, the reaction was brutal. Critics tore it apart, calling it lifeless, confusing, and shallow. Rotten Tomatoes scored it embarrassingly low, and major outlets mocked its wooden performances and lack of cultural authenticity. What stung most wasn't just the criticism, it was the personal attacks. Reviewers singled out Keanu, calling him dull, robotic, and a relic of a bygone era. The narrative quickly spread. Keanu Reeves, once the golden child of Hollywood, had lost his magic. By the time the dust settled, 47 Ronin had earned just over $150 million worldwide, a staggering loss that branded it a flop of epic proportions. Industry insiders whispered that Keanu's career was finished. And the cruelest part, some even seemed gleeful about it. The press, always hungry for blood, ran headlines dripping with mockery. Trade magazines labeled Keanu box office poison, claiming he could no longer carry a film. Online commentators ridiculed his stoic acting style, using memes and cruel jokes to strip him of dignity. Hollywood executives, once eager to attach his name to projects, now began distancing themselves. Suddenly, doors that had once swung open effortlessly for him were slamming shut. Keanu, the man who had once been Neo, the One, was now being told he was no one. It was a humiliation not just on a professional level, but on a deeply personal one. For a man who had endured unspeakable grief in his private life, now the entire world was watching his professional life crumble in slow motion. This was not just a stumble, this was a public execution. But Keanu did not fight back, not in the way Hollywood expected. There were no angry interviews, no desperate attempts to defend himself, no public meltdowns. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He stayed silent. He let the storm rage on around him, choosing instead to disappear into the shadows. For years, Keanu quietly stepped back from the spotlight, riding his motorcycle through the streets of Los Angeles, supporting small projects and living simply. To many, it looked like surrender. But what no one knew at the time was that this silence was not weakness. It was preparation. Keanu wasn't done, not even close. The flop of 47 Ronin would not be his end. Instead, it would become the spark that ignited the greatest revenge story Hollywood had ever seen. In the ashes of failure, Keanu found something more powerful than the applause of critics or the approval of executives. He found resolve. And as the years passed, as the industry mocked him and dismissed him, Keanu was quietly planning his return. He was training, he was waiting, he was preparing. They thought they had buried him. They didn't realize he was a seed. And soon, he would rise again, stronger, sharper, and deadlier than ever before. The failure of 47 Ronin didn't just sting, it burned. For Hollywood, a flop of that magnitude wasn't just a disappointment. It was a scarlet letter branded onto Keanu Reeves' career. Universal Pictures had gambled nearly $200 million on his name, and the loss was catastrophic. Behind the closed doors of studio boardrooms, executives began to whisper that Keanu Reeves was no longer a safe bet. His name, once a golden ticket to box office glory, was now treated as a liability. Casting agents moved his headshots lower in the pile, producers quietly removed his name from potential projects, and financiers recoiled at the thought of putting him at the center of another big-budget film. In the ruthless calculus of Hollywood, where a star's value is measured in numbers, Keanu Reeves had become box office poison. He was, in the eyes of the industry, finished. The press poured gasoline on the fire. Headlines didn't just report the failure, they celebrated it. Entertainment magazines called him irrelevant. Critics declared him outdated, mocking his acting style as stiff and unemotional. Online forums, now louder than ever with the rise of social media, turned his misfortune into endless punchlines. To the world, Keanu Reeves was a relic of the 1990s, a washed-up action star who had outlived his usefulness. And perhaps the most painful part of it all was that these voices weren't only coming from strangers. Hollywood, the very industry he had helped shape, was now treating him like a ghost. Invitations to premieres stopped arriving. Scripts stopped landing on his desk. The spotlight that had once burned so brightly now vanished, leaving him in the cold. For most actors, this would have been the end. For Keanu, it was something far more complicated, because beneath the professional rejection lay something even heavier, his personal grief. In the span of just a few years, Keanu had endured tragedies that would have broken anyone else. He had lost his daughter before she could take her first breath. He had lost his partner, Jennifer, in a tragic accident that left him hollow. Friends close to him described him during this period as quiet, withdrawn, and unreachable. He spent much of his time alone, riding his motorcycle through the streets of Los Angeles, eating meals at small cafes by himself, reading books in silence. To outsiders, it looked like a man fading away, both from the industry and from life itself. Hollywood had forgotten him, and the world assumed he was finished. But Keanu Reeves wasn't fading. He was surviving. He was enduring. And in that endurance, something was beginning to change. The aftermath of failure often defines a person more than success ever could. For Keanu, the rejection, the ridicule, and the loneliness became fuel. He did not lash out at his critics. He did not demand the industry take him back. Instead, he lived with a kind of radical humility, focusing on small independent films, helping friends with their projects, and supporting charities in secret. He was seen giving up his seat on the subway, donating millions to hospitals without attaching his name, and treating strangers with kindness. Hollywood had stripped him of status, but it could not take away his humanity. And slowly, in the silence, Keanu began to heal. What no one knew at the time was that beneath the surface, he was preparing. He was waiting for the right story, the right role, the right moment to remind the world who he truly was. And when that moment arrived, it would not just be a comeback, it would be revenge. The aftermath of his so-called flop was meant to bury him. Instead, it transformed him. Keanu Reeves learned that the industry's opinion of him did not define his worth. He learned that ridicule could be endured. And he discovered that sometimes the best revenge is not immediate. It's patience, it's silence, it's the refusal to give up when the world has already declared you finished. What Hollywood thought was his ending was, in truth, only an intermission. Keanu Reeves was not gone. He was sharpening his edge. And soon, he would return in a way that no one could have predicted. In the quiet years after 47 Ronin, most people thought Keanu Reeves had slipped into obscurity for good. Hollywood had written its obituary for his career, critics had moved on to fresher targets, and audiences largely assumed his story had ended. But in the shadows, something was stirring. For Keanu, those silent years were not a retreat, they were an incubation. While others saw a broken star, Keanu saw an opportunity. He began training again, throwing himself into the discipline of martial arts, gun work, and physical conditioning. Every punch, every roll, every stance was practiced with relentless precision. He wasn't preparing for fame. He wasn't even preparing for Hollywood's approval. He was preparing for something else entirely. A chance to remind the world, not through words, but through action, of who he really was. And that chance came in the form of a script that few in Hollywood took seriously, but one that would change everything. John Wick. The premise was deceptively simple. A retired assassin seeking vengeance after the death of his dog, the last gift from his late wife. On paper, it sounded small, even strange. Hardly the kind of film that could reignite a forgotten career. Studios didn't believe in it. Executives doubted it could succeed in a market dominated by superhero blockbusters and franchise giants. But when Keanu read the script, something inside him clicked. It wasn't just a story about a man losing his dog. It was about grief, love, and vengeance. It was about a man who had lost everything, and the world's mistake in thinking that loss had left him weak. Keanu saw himself in John Wick. The pain, the silence, the endurance, it all mirrored his own life. This wasn't just a role. It was a reflection of his own story, waiting to be told through bullets, bruises, and fire. So Keanu committed himself completely. He trained 8 hours a day, mastering Brazilian jiu-jitsu, judo, and gun fu. He practiced weapon drills until they became muscle memory, studied stunt driving, and performed sequences so demanding that stunt coordinators were left in awe. The film didn't have the colossal budget of 47 Ronin, but what it lacked in money, it made up for in grit. And Keanu gave it everything he had. with no guarantee that anyone would even care. The directors, Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, former stuntmen who had worked with Keanu on The Matrix, were equally determined. They wanted to strip away the spectacle of bloated blockbusters and return to something raw, visceral, and personal. Together, they built a world of assassins, codes, and consequences, and at the center of it, they placed Keanu Reeves, the man Hollywood had left behind. What they didn't know was that this film would not only revive a career, but spark a cultural phenomenon. When John Wick premiered in 2014, it didn't just land, it detonated. Audiences were electrified by its choreography, its relentless pacing, and its emotional core. Critics who had once mocked Keanu now found themselves praising him, calling his performance career-defining. Fans, old and new, rallied behind him, creating a movement that grew with each sequel. Suddenly, the same industry that had buried him was scrambling to resurrect him. Keanu Reeves wasn't just back, he was reborn. And what made it sweeter was the irony. His revenge wasn't against one critic, one executive, or even one flop. His revenge was against an entire system that had written him off. And he had taken it not with anger, not with arrogance, but with discipline, silence, and the power of his craft. John Wick wasn't just a film. It was a declaration. Keanu Reeves was here to stay. The spark of revenge was never loud, never brash. It wasn't about shouting at the world, "Look at me." It was about proving, with undeniable force, that resilience is stronger than ridicule. Keanu Reeves transformed failure into fuel, grief into grit, and silence into strength. What Hollywood had called his flop became the foundation for his most powerful role. And in doing so, Keanu taught the world a lesson it would never forget. Underestimate him at your peril. When John Wick hit theaters in 2014, nobody expected much. It wasn't backed by a massive studio push. It wasn't marketed as the next great franchise. To most of Hollywood, it looked like another small action flick destined to be forgotten. But what happened next stunned everyone. From the very first screenings, word spread like wildfire. Audiences weren't just entertained, they were hooked. The choreography was unlike anything people had seen in years. Raw, precise, and brutal. The world-building was mysterious yet fascinating, pulling viewers into a shadowy underworld of assassins bound by unbreakable codes. And at the heart of it all was Keanu Reeves, delivering a performance that was both devastatingly emotional and terrifyingly lethal. The critics who had once labeled him wooden suddenly praised his quiet intensity. Fans who had assumed his best days were behind him now declared, loudly and proudly, that Keanu Reeves was back. But this wasn't just a comeback, it was a resurrection. John Wick grossed more than double its modest budget, but the numbers told only part of the story. The film became a cult sensation, spreading through word of mouth, online forums, and fan communities. Clips of Keanu's training sessions went viral, showing the world his dedication, his precision, and his relentless work ethic. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. He was no longer the washed-up actor from a failed samurai epic. He was the man who had reinvented action cinema, the star who had given the genre back its soul. And as sequels were greenlit, each bigger and bolder than the last, Keanu Reeves didn't just ride the wave, he became the wave. With every installment, the John Wick series grew into a global phenomenon, cementing him as one of the greatest action stars of all time. Hollywood, of course, scrambled to rewrite the story. Executives who had once ignored him now fought to work with him. Journalists who had mocked him rushed to praise his unmatched resilience. Directors who had dismissed him as unbankable now called him an icon. The very industry that had turned its back on him was now at his feet, desperate to capitalize on the phenomenon he had created. But Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't rub their faces in their own hypocrisy. That wasn't his style. His revenge wasn't loud or boastful, it was quiet, undeniable, and absolute. He let his work speak louder than any interview ever could. And in that silence, he achieved the sweetest payback imaginable: respect. Real respect. Not the fleeting kind granted by temporary fame, but the lasting kind earned through perseverance and authenticity. The ultimate comeback wasn't just about money or headlines, it was about legacy. Keanu Reeves had turned the humiliation of 47 Ronin into fuel, forging it into a blade sharper than any sword he'd wielded on screen. He proved that failure is not the opposite of success, it is the foundation of it. The very thing that critics thought had destroyed him had, in truth, rebuilt him stronger than ever, and audiences could feel it. Fans didn't just cheer for John Wick, they cheered for Keanu Reeves himself. They saw in him a reflection of their own struggles, their own setbacks, their own need to rise after being knocked down. He wasn't just playing a character seeking revenge, he was the revenge. Every bullet fired, every fist thrown, every moment of controlled fury on screen was a statement to the world. Keanu Reeves will not be forgotten. And so, with John Wick, the man once branded as irrelevant, became the centerpiece of one of the most celebrated action franchises of the century. His ultimate comeback wasn't measured in ticket sales or critical reviews, it was measured in redemption. Keanu had endured the darkness, embraced the pain, and turned it into something unforgettable. His revenge wasn't about crushing enemies, it was about proving, through sheer resilience, that no amount of failure, no wave of ridicule, no Hollywood betrayal could erase him. He had risen, and this time, no one could bring him down. Revenge, in the Hollywood sense, is usually loud. It comes with red carpets, victory speeches, and gloating headlines. But Keanu Reeves' revenge was different. It was quiet, disciplined, and enduring, so much so that it became bigger than any box office number or film franchise. What began as a career once mocked and buried in failure transformed into something immortal, a story of resilience. When John Wick exploded into a global phenomenon, it did more than restore Keanu's reputation. It rewrote the rules of Hollywood itself. Suddenly, studios realized that patience, humility, and authenticity could outlast the shallow cycles of fame. Keanu's silent endurance became an example, not only to struggling actors but to anyone who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or forgotten. He didn't scream for attention. He simply did the work, and in doing so, he forced the world to pay attention once more. The revenge that changed everything was not against one critic, or one film, or even one studio. It was against the very idea that failure defines a person. 47 Ronin was meant to be his burial ground, but it became his rebirth. The industry's rejection was meant to silence him, but it sharpened his focus. Every insult hurled his way, every headline declaring him finished, became fuel for his rise. And when he finally stood tall again, he didn't need to call out his doubters. The success of John Wick did it for him. The applause of millions around the globe became his answer. The irony was beautiful. The same critics who once dismissed him were now calling him one of the greatest action stars of his generation. The very machine that had tried to erase him was now depending on him to fill theaters. His revenge was poetic because it was not about destruction, it was about transformation. And yet, Keanu's legacy extends far beyond the silver screen. What makes his story unforgettable is not just that he came back, it's how he came back. He did not bend to bitterness. He did not drown himself in arrogance or lash out at those who mocked him. Instead, he carried himself with grace. He continued to ride the subway with strangers, to sign autographs with humility, to give away his earnings to crew members and charities. He proved that you can endure humiliation, survive tragedy, and still remain kind. That is the greatest revenge of all, to succeed without losing your humanity. Hollywood tried to strip him of worth, but Keanu proved that true worth does not come from awards, critics, or box office numbers. It comes from character. And character, unlike fame, cannot be taken away. Today, Keanu Reeves is not just an actor, he is a symbol. He is the embodiment of resilience, the quiet warrior who turned failure into triumph. His story echoes beyond Hollywood, resonating with anyone who has been told, "You're finished," anyone who has stumbled and been laughed at, anyone who has been underestimated. His revenge wasn't just personal, it was universal. Because when Keanu Reeves rose from the ashes of his biggest flop, he carried with him a message for the entire world. Failure is not the end. It is the beginning. Revenge is not about shouting, it is about proving. And success, when it comes after the storm, is sweeter than anything else. So when we look at Keanu Reeves today, when we see him standing tall at premieres, when we see him embraced by millions of fans, when we see the industry that once mocked him now celebrating him, we are reminded of one undeniable truth. His biggest flop did not destroy him. It built him. It was the fire that forged his strength, the loss that created his triumph, the humiliation that became his ultimate revenge story. And that is why Keanu Reeves is more than just an actor. He is a legend. Not because he dodged bullets on screen, but because he dodged the bullets of failure, ridicule, and grief in real life, and still came out standing. Keanu Reeves' revenge changed everything, not just for him, but for everyone who has ever needed a reason to rise again.